Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Saturday morning's property show. Now, we are talking about raising the rent this morning, Jim, and how to renegotiate higher rent without losing your tenant. So, a bit controversial, some might say. A really good topic to cover, I think, at the moment, especially with all the changes in legislation recently and the pending change in legislation coming on the 1st of April. So if you are a landlord or investor or indeed a tenant, then this might be an interesting show for you. And we are going to cover quite a lot today, Jim, and in particular the legislation here in Scotland. Um, so I think that anybody that's watching and wants to interact and ask questions, please jump into the comments. We'll try and keep it interactive. We'll get through as much as we can today in terms of the content and the questions. So let's kick it off.
I think this is the best time to be a landlord ever. Honestly, I genuinely believe this is the best time to be a private landlord ever. There is huge amounts of opportunity on the horizon. Raising the rent is just one of them. And then there's lots of other opportunities as well. And I don't think everybody realizes how beneficial it is to be a private landlord right now. They just think about the emotional aspect. This is what we talk about. We talked about this behavioral finance. This is a classic
Yes.
example about behavioral finance in the Wealth Creation Show, about the fact that a lot of landlords, I see it on all the forums, they're going on, oh, I'm going to be selling because I can't stand it anymore. I can't stand it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
All your decisions are made on emotion. It's like, oh my God, if you did the numbers and worked out exactly where the rent return is and the future earnings and the compounded wealth you get as a result of being in the property market as a private rented landlord, then you wouldn't have any doubts about staying at all or leaving. It's like you'd be here for the long term. You'd be here for generational wealth, definitely. I don't know any other asset class it can compound and generate an income as well as what property does and rent and property. Mainstream residential renting. I'm not talking about HMO. I'm not talking about student lets. I'm not talking about holiday lets. I'm not talking about service accommodation or anything like that at all. I'm talking about hardcore, what we call vanilla lets. In other words, it is so
Oh, yeah.
boring.
Boring as
You need to
well.
do something else to get some excitement in your life. That's how it is. But I tell you what, it generates wealth every single time as a result of that.
Yeah.
And on that note,
Yeah,
it's over to you.
but you always plug that, Jim, and it's true. Boring pays well, and from the medium to long term in residential letting, can be really a really good compounding effect for your own wealth. And we
Yeah.
talk about that a lot on the Wealth Creation Show. It's interesting that you say that, Jim, about this being the best time for being a landlord. And a lot of people, because of the changes in legislation, or they are not educated enough to the legislation, it builds up fear in people, and it is quite scary if you're unsure,
The
and it makes
private
people
rented
walk away.
sector The private rented sector in Scotland in 2021 was 400,000 properties. It's 340,000 properties in 2022. What? How do you not see opportunity in that? It's like, oh
Yeah,
my God, restriction of supply instantly determines rents to
oh
go
yeah,
up as a natural result of that, and occupancy rates to go up as well. Geez, if you're in this right now as a private landlord, God, this is the time. You're about to leave when everybody else is about to ride the wave.
hmm yeah, yeah, and I think as well with the legislation that's been put in place in recent years, and in the new legislation, I think as long as you understand it and use it to your advantage, then it's not something to shy away from or be scared of. It's all about educating yourself and having the right knowledge and tools to obviously navigate your way through things, or have somebody that could do that for you.
Yep.
So anyway, let's talk about raising the rent. And I mean, is there anything trickier than a rent review with a tenant, and
No.
one especially that you want to keep? um, it's little wonder so many landlords leave things as they are, no matter how far behind the market, and their income falls. Do you know, there's a lot of people who have sat for a lot of years and let their rent stay the same as the market obviously changes and time goes by. And eventually, though, but then there's a difference, I think, with that, Jim, because you were aware of that, but you've obviously looked at the risk factor and mitigated where you were in terms of your financial situation, and that was fine, and your numbers worked. Other people possibly have just shied away from it, and their income's obviously suffering for that. But
This is a
eventually,
point,
though,
Richard. This is a point in time, Richard, when you think about it. You have got limited supply in Scotland, especially right across England as well. Complete limited supply. Therefore, if you raise the rent and the tenant says, "Well, I don't want to pay that," well, okay, you can put it against. You can get the rent assessor to. You can appeal to the rent assessor.
yeah,
The rent assessor can determine as well whether that rent's fair or not. And if the rent assessor determines that it's fair, job's done, independently verified, rent is going up. Oh, I'll leave. Oh, okay, no bother. That's fine. Because of the complete restriction in supply, everybody else will be like, well, you're leaving, and there's 10 other people in at the door
yeah,
actually knocking on it, wanting it. So that's where we are right now. Now, it wasn't like that 5 years ago. It was the
no,
other way around. It was like, oh my God, I need somebody desperately. But now the tide has turned. It's our time to work that and actually be in a better position as a result of that. So every dog has their day, is the expression, and the day and the year it's to come, and the years that have to come now are the private landlords' years to come. Definitely, this is where the best returns will ever be made, and this will be the best time to start off as a private landlord and actually build wealth over the medium to long term as a result of that.
yeah, definitely. And as I say, obviously the situation with not raising the rent, eventually though, an underperforming property will really push a landlord to sell up, and that's what we're seeing a lot of at the moment. And that's resulting in a tenant losing their home, and then ultimately another house out of the sector and less available housing. So we want your property to stay in the market and the local rental market, especially in Fife. I see the demand every day, and it to be a valuable long-term investment for your future. And also, it's a smart move to do a performance MOT each year of your property, and that includes obviously looking at the rent and things, beginning with some of the following, and this is what we're going to cover today. How far has your property slipped behind the current rental market value? Why aren't you charging the full market rent? I mean, if you're not, you need to question why you're not in line with the market rent. I know obviously there's restrictions in Scotland at the moment. That's going to change come the 1st of April, and we'll talk about that as we go on. And where does the law stand on rent increases? And that's obviously a big topic just now in Scotland. And how do you approach your tenant about putting the rent up? There's a correct way to do that, and it's to have that conversation and both sides on board, and we're going to cover that as well. So with these questions answered and the tips, the expert tips right here today, you could easily and smoothly navigate and negotiate a new rent while keeping your tenants happy and your business, your buy-to-let business thriving. And ultimately, that's what you want: happy tenants and a good thriving portfolio. If that is what you have, obviously in your buy-to-let portfolio, if you've got several properties, you don't want them underperforming. Or even if you've just got one, which a lot of people do, one or two.
Definitely, 94% of landlords in Scotland have one property. 2%, no, I think it's 94%, and 5% have two properties or more. Two properties, sorry, on its own, and 1% of private landlords in Scotland have three properties or more. If you haven't increased your rent for more than a year, then you're going to have to do it. I'll be honest. The reality is, you can blame for the tenants out there. You can blame Patrick Harvey for this, the Minister for Tenants, because very rarely did any private landlord, like myself even, we never even made any attempt to increase rents when a tenant was in situ anyway. It was never any in our mindset, because we thought, well, the numbers work out, the tenant's happy, I'm happy, the return's all right. But then Patrick Harvey came along and says, no, you can increase your rent by 3% every single year as a matter of legislation. And we're going to have a moratorium on evictions. And then every landlord popped their ears up and went, what, sorry? We can increase our rent by 3% every single year. Now, we'd worked this out. If I increase my rents just by 3% every single year for the next 10 years, I will give myself a pay rise in 10 years' time of £196,000 a year.
That's crazy numbers.
And that's only 3% a year for me. Now you've got my attention, Patrick Harvey. And it's all your fault. As far as any tenants should do, they should understand completely. The Minister for Tenants has taught every private landlord in Scotland, and probably England as well, to increase their rents every single year now, as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, we've went from years past where a lot of landlords have never done any annual increases during tenancies or any increases at all during tenancies. It was only the over a tenancy, and now that has been brought in, and it's part of the obviously the normal process now to do annual increases. So, but as you say, Jim, if you haven't increased your rent on your property for more than a year, then you're almost certainly probably getting less income than you should be or you could be. So make some time and research and think about what your next move is going to be. And I think firstly, what are you going to say, Jim?
I think it's important to understand from a landlord's point of view, an investor's point of view, that in order to refurbish your stock, you're going to have to increase your rents. Let me just
Mhm.
remind you that every single year, the housing associations and the council increase their rents. And yet a landlord, maybe once every 5 years, decides, look, I need to increase my rents. It's getting really near the line for me. I can't afford to run this anymore. I'll reinvest in the property to give you a new kitchen, new bathroom, new heating system. And everybody's up in arms with their pitchforks and torches. It's like, oh my God, it's like the landlord's increasing his rent after 5 years. And yet the local authority does it and the housing associations do it every single year.
Mhm.
And nobody bats an eyelid about that. It's no in the news. It's no hyper. It's no all over social media or anything like that. Everybody just expects it to happen. Well, guess what? It's going to happen every single year from now on for private landlords. And that's as a result of the legislation that was forced on us. But I've got to say as well, Richard, you talk about how far it's behind the current rental value. We need that money to reinvest back in the property. There's no doubt
Yeah.
about that. I earn my income where I earn it. I don't earn it on most of the properties I've got. All the properties I've got just goes back into refurbishing the stock and renovating the stock and making sure the tenant's happy and well looked after as a result of that. That's why the rent increases in order for me to keep doing that. Because guess what? My contractors are no going to no increase their prices. My bank's not going to turn round to say me to say, oh well, you can take a holiday anytime you want. No, you don't need to pay your interest only mortgage this month. It's like we don't expect. Oh, it's all right. You just take a month off, Jim, and you give that to the tenant. No, your insurance isn't going to go down in price, so that goes up, and then yourself, Richard, your managing agent's not going to say, I tell you what, I'll take a pay cut so you can keep the price down for your tenant. It's like, no, I'm paying for 4 of my properties, right? I'm paying factor fees of £90 a month
Yeah, I know what ones you're talking about.
each. And when you factor into the fact that taking that off of the rent that I charge my tenant, I'm literally charging a 1 bedroom rate. We're taking that hit for the factor fees, a 1 bedroom rate for a 2 bedroom property as a result of that. That's the difference here. And nobody understands that. This is a business at the end of the day. It is not a registered charity. If you want a registered charity, go to Shelter. But Shelter don't actually build any houses at all. All they do is
I know.
take everybody's money and actually spend it on themselves and have a great time. And they supposedly advise people. But do you know every single person they advise? It costs them £4,000 for every single person they advise. That's how much Shelter costs. They don't build any
Really?
houses at all. All these people, they're quick to castigate private landlords, but we're putting a roof over people's heads, whereas people like Shelter are just giving it that from the sidelines.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Anyway, let's move on.
Anyway, yeah. So, yeah, thinking about your rent being behind where it should be, the first port of call probably is speaking. Well, most definitely speaking to your letting or managing agent and seeing whether what their take is on it. If they feel that an increase is due or needs to be implemented, um, and how to go about possibly speaking to your tenant and seeing how they feel about the rent increase. Do you know a tenant might even be sitting thinking about already leaving, or considering moving. So do you know to engage with conversations like that is really important. You could also have a look. I mean, look online. I mean, there isn't a great deal on available at the moment in Fife because we're short in supply
Mhm.
and high in demand. But browse the property portals or websites and local estate agents and letting agents and things to get an idea how much rent levels are. Now, there's a lot of different rent levels at the moment. There's some I see coming on and I'm thinking, that's not priced correctly. But then obviously you're always going to get that. I just think at the moment, because in between tenancies or new properties coming on, people are thinking, let's hike it up. And I've seen some crazy rent levels. But
They're going to they have to hike it up, Richard. The reason that private landlords have to hike the rent up in between tenancies when they change over is because the existing tenancies were restricted with the amount of rent they could
yeah,
increase. So
and then they've
therefore,
just
all the
jumped
costs
this,
actually, all the costs on these ones actually became prohibitive to the point where it's like, I should really maybe sell that one because I can't increase the rent anymore. Therefore, the tenant's displaced as a natural result of that. So no one wants the tenant not to have a home because they've got nowhere to go. The council and the government's no building enough houses for anybody. So we're having to take up that slack and fulfill that obligation. It's meant to be by the local authority and by the government themselves. So we're helping the government out. And at the same time, while we're trying to help the government out, we've got somebody at the back of us, well, whip, like the government, going, come on, do this, do that, do this, do that. And it's like, wait a minute, we're trying to help you. And it's like, that is a recipe for disaster. This is why a lot of people have actually left the buy-to-let market. 15% so far from 2021 to 2022. 15% less stock in Scotland. And I think it'll be across England as well, more than likely, than there was before, as a natural result of what's happening and how the government stance is towards private landlords. They need us more than ever. And it's important then, this mid-tenancy will have to increase the rents to the real high market rent. And as a result of that, we're getting castigated on the news. But the reality is the people that are sitting in rental values right now are having it, they're having it a great time. I've got one it's now, it's probably £750 to £800 a month market rent. And I'm only allowed to charge them £563. £300. I'm taking a hit for about £4,000 a year in the rent. And then somebody comes to me and says, why is that no sorted? Why is this no fixed? Why is that no fixed? Why is my heating why am I not getting a new heating system? Why is my kitchen falling apart? It's like, I'm being completely restricted by my rents as a result of that. That's what most private landlords are going through right now. They have got no money to do anything because basically and my interest rates have moved up as well, and my contractor rates and my insurance rates have moved up. So basically my rent's getting restricted, my insurance rates are moving up, and it's like, sorry, where's the margin in this to do anything? There's nothing. There's no margin in this. There's no profit in here to do anything. Profit is needed in order to reinvest back in the business. Get that into your thick head, you nutters out there, thinking that profits are a sham or a shame or something like that. There's not. You need a profit to run a business and then reinvest back into your business itself and actually refurbish your stock so your tenant is actually looked after. It's important. It's the lifeblood of the business. No profit, you're out of business.
Yeah. Do you know, refurbishing and reinvesting in your stock and making sure your property is up to scratch is so important. And I think if you're, like I was just saying, if you're looking at the market and trying to compare your property to similar to get an idea of rent levels, or be honest with yourself and about your own property and how it actually compares to the rest of the market, and whether have you really maintained your property at a level where it could actually match the top performing properties that are on the market and achieving these higher rents. Because you could look at something and just, it's not just to say, oh, that's a 2 or a 3 bedroom. That's not the best way just to compare it. You need to really look at how it's been maintained and how its upkeep's been withheld throughout that tenancy. And if yours isn't up to the same standard, then you're not going to get the same rent level. I think, and then finally, obviously, in that aspect, remember to factor in the costs of finding a new tenant as well. Now, a lot of people don't really appreciate everything that happens in this initial stage. Obviously, as a letting agent, I'm all too aware that there's referencing, there's obviously inventories, there is our fee to obviously carry out the marketing and the view-ins and the face-to-face referencing as well. It's not just all on paper. It's like it's a people thing as well.
And let me cover that as well then, about your fee, Richard. When you think about it now, the minimum wage is going up again to literally £11.50 an hour. So it's gone up quite substantially as a result of that. Therefore, costs are going up again more than 6%. So again, we're at this stage where costs are going up 6%, yet inflation's sitting at 4%, and the minimum wage is going up 6%, and you're not going to cause wage inflation. But then you've got all these people to pay, and then private landlords included, and everybody else that gets some sort of service from a business, are you start going on. Well, that's ridiculous. That costs a lot more than it should do. I'm going to vote with my feet. And then they go to the cheapest chips person who's actually on the bread line, and then they wonder why they're not getting the right results and the right service they're getting. And they wonder why their tenant's leaving as a natural result of that, because no one's getting back to the tenant about any repairs and improvements, because they've got no staff, because they can't afford to pay anyone, because you're not paying them enough as a private landlord for the letting agency service.
Mm-hmm.
See how that all spirals as a
As a
natural
knock-on
result?
effect, yes.
All
Definitely.
because of this fact, all because of this thing about we don't want to pay the right market rent for a property. Well, it's there for a reason. Tell you what, though, I quite blatantly said on one of the forums the other now, wouldn't it be good if we all put in rent increases to our tenant, and every single tenant had the right to the rent assessor, all en masse for 340,000 properties that they want their rent reviewed? There's only 2 rent assessors, I think, in Scotland.
So that'll give them plenty of work.
340,000 rent reviews in 3 months. No chance. But they deserve it, don't they? I really feel like getting a wee campaign together and saying, tell you what, let's do all this. And actually just tell our tenants, go and send it in to get it reviewed. We know it's going to pass anyway and it's fine, but just go and send it in to get reviewed, just to overwhelm the rent registration service, because they deserve it, because of what they've done to private landlords, the government as well.
Yeah, it's not been easy. And I think the next thing, and I think recent legislation and things will make this question as why aren't you charging the full market rent? And that's the question that come to people's mind when the rent freeze was implemented in Scotland, and then obviously costs started to come in with obviously your mortgage, your interest, just everything, like you say, contractors, materials, everything. Then you were at a point where you're like, I need to charge more rent. Well, obviously you were restricted for doing that with the rent freeze. And then the question come up, well, why wasn't I charging the full market rent? Why have I never increased it? And some rental homes do fall behind their full income potential simply because the landlord doesn't think maybe about increasing the rent at that time. But others have some more specific reasons. And let's see if some of these kind of strike a chord with people. So you have an excellent relationship with your tenant, or you're renting to a friend or a relative or another personal connection, or whatever that may be, and you feel uncomfortable about increasing the rent.
That's the worst position to be in.
Yeah.
That's the worst position to be in. Do you know why? Because you feel compelled to charge them a lower rent as a result. And therefore, what happens when anything goes wrong, the relationship turns just like that. Into a bad relationship. Now, the tenant, because you've got a good relationship with them, and it's your pal, or it's your friend, or it's your relative, or it's your daughter, or your auntie, your uncle, or all the rest of it, you feel compelled to take the hit every single time as a result of that, and you end up doing that all the time and not charging the full market rent. But I tell you what, they'll go hell for leather at you when they realise that something's broken and they want it fixed, and you've not got any money to do it.
Yeah.
That's why it's better to use a letting agent. I tell everybody every single time, but it's my daughter. It's like, no, trust me, still use a letting agent, even if it's your own daughter or your son, even or whatever it is. If you're wanting to keep that relationship as it should be, you should have a letting agent doing it and let them take care of that responsibility for you, so you're not loggerheads with them. Because I know every single time that when most private landlords rent to a relative, they end up charging them nothing or letting them away with the rent when they don't actually pay.
Yeah.
And then they come to us, or they come to me, and I've heard it before, and go, what do I do now? And I'm thinking, flipping it, you should have used a letting agent in the beginning, because you wouldn't be then in this situation. And you've made a total mess of it.
Yeah, it keeps you totally
total mess of it.
Yeah. Yeah, we see that all too often, and particularly if people are self-managing, they don't like the awkward conversation, they don't like the confrontation, and that's what a letting agent's there for, and that's what you pay them for. So that is a really good one, and something that happens quite a lot. Also, sometimes people, maybe you've agreed a lower rent in return for your tenant taking special care of the property in certain areas, like maybe keeping the garden upkeep and manicured, or looking after. Do you know, if you've got, sometimes I see people that want to store stuff in the garage and things. You know, there's like agreements like that between people, which I don't recommend. And that's all things. I mean, fair enough if you've agreed for them to take care of the garden, but then really they should pay a gardener to do that.
Yeah, ideally that's what you're probably needing to do. I would agree.
Yeah, and also if the property maybe requires upgrades or refurbishments, to match maybe higher rents being achieved by other homes that are maybe more up to date, and that's something as well that could come up. So whether the deal is at your property, what matters is having clarity over why the rent is actually below its full potential, and whether you feel rewarded enough to leave things alone, or if it's time to really make a change. And I think you really need to think about where your rent level sits, especially with everything that's happening with the legislation in the past year in Scotland.
It's quite interesting. It's like we talk about that. Why aren't you charging the full market rent? And the uncomfortableness a lot of people have in actually going to their tenant and saying, look, your rent's going to have to go up. But do you know they actually restrict it and restrict it and restrict it and don't do it? Their tenant ends up leaving, okay, and then they have to get another tenant. The tenant goes through all the disruption of having to leave, but they end up, the irony is the tenant goes to a property they're actually having to pay more rent on.
Yeah, I know. After all,
They didn't
I know.
want to pay the rent in the first place with the existing property they're at. I'm no paying your increase in rent. I'm going to leave. And it's like the disruption of moving combined with the fact that you're going to have to pay probably more rent to get to the next property you're going to, and the costs and the time and the travel and all the rest of it. It's like you should have just stayed where you are and just accepted a small rent increase, and you wouldn't have had any hassle in your life after that. But they get, because this is the first time the approach of the rent increases come into fruition. This is why I say, because Patrick Harvey's given us license to do it, the Minister for Tenants has given us license to increase the rents. Start increasing your rents every single year from now on. That's my advice to every single private landlord in Scotland, right across the UK, actually.
To do. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like the smoking ban. When the smoking ban, it was difficult to ask somebody to stand outside and don't smoke in your property. But as soon as the smoking ban came in for the pubs, it's like when you said to a tenant, it's like, well, you can't really smoke in the house. I'm like, yeah, that's fine, I understand.
yeah.
It's like, because they all fell in line like the pubs. It's like, and it was great. The smoking ban was fantastic for the private rented sector. It did me a great favour because I get properties back, and it's very rarely anybody's ever smoked in them.
Very, very rare. And it's funny, people even in their own homes now, I mean, the majority don't smoke, they smoke it outside.
Yeah.
But it's just become the general
Herd
consensus.
mentality.
Yeah.
Mentality, and the best thing that happened was the legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say it again, the best thing that happened was the legislation. Thank you, Patrick Harvey. And everybody realised that the mistake he's made, because they've claimed all this time, Richard, that it's like, no, there's no change in the private renting sector. There's no change in the number of properties available for rent. The landlord registration figures don't reflect that. That's a lie, because they just produced the landlord registration figures for 21 to 22, and they went down by 60,000 properties. It's like, so they've just lied. Or should I say, in what you say in a court is like, I think the Minister for Tenants was mistaken. Well, let's just call it as it is, aka a lie. A lie. Let's say it as it is. Oh, politicians lie. Really? Never. Of course they do.
Another point, obviously, when we're talking about raising the rent is your tenant actually someone that you want in the property and want to keep as a tenant? So more than ensuring the property remains a good investment, a rent review can really incentivize excellent tenants to stay and maybe a more disappointing tenant to move on. But then what really makes a truly great tenant? So let's have a wee think about that and discuss.
We'll get onto that in a minute. This is a good one. I just took over these 30 properties, and a guy's been living with us in his property for 17 years, right? We've no intention of increasing the rents or anything like that. We've no intention of doing anything else. We just went to him to ask to pay his rent and went, I've had enough of this. I'm moving out. The landlord's no doing anything. I've only just taken over 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
It's like I've only taken the property on 2 weeks ago. Our intention is to refurbish these properties over a period of time, not actually just let them fall into neglect again. And it's like, and the guy's like, I'm leaving. I was like, aye, okay, then fine. Because I looked at his rent and thought, oh my God, it's like I could put this rent up quite easily for the next tenant. So that's fine with me. But fill your boots. You can leave if you want.
Yeah.
So as you're a tenant, don't cut off your nose to spite your face, if you understand what I'm saying here.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the bigger picture here. Think about the disruption of moving. Think about having to pay higher rent somewhere else. And it's like, well, wait a minute, just come down to commercial reality. Just actually look at your circumstances and think, and just reel it in, and just like, you know, eat some humble pie for a change. I have to do it as a landlord often, and it's fine. I'm okay with that, and it's just one of these things. But if you learn to do that, your life's going to be a lot happier and less stressful as a result. Somebody once said to me, somebody very wiser than me, said you could be right or you could be rich. Which one do you want to be, Jim?
That's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. Keith Cunningham, rich dad, or rich dad, poor dad. Yeah. You could be right or you could be rich, Jim. Which one do you want to be? And I was like scratching my head thinking, can I not just be both? And then eventually over the weekend that I'd spent with him, the penny dropped. It's like, oh, get it now. Because it is. That's the cutting off the nose to spite your face. Just because I'm wanting to be right. It's like, and then you go to your next place and you're paying more rent. The landlord you don't know, you don't know their track record. So the landlord could be even worse. It could be out the frying pan out the fire. And then you're not getting anything done. And you're too late. You've moved from the comfortable situation you were before, all because your ego got in the way.
Yeah.
So don't let it get in the way. And the same applies to a landlord as well in your situation. I've seen so many landlords fall out with their tenants just because it's like, I think you should be cutting the grass on a Sunday. And the tenant goes, well, I'm going to cut it on a Saturday.
Yeah,
And it's
the
like,
grass needs to be this level. And
Sunday. Yeah, that's it then. I'm taking the property back, and it's like, you're having a laugh, really? It's like to the landlord. It's like,
I know.
you idiot. Are you stupid or something? You've got a tenant looking after your property. You've got a tenant paying the rent on time. You've got a tenant. It's not antisocial in the environment that they're in, and you're actually upset because they're no cutting their grass on the day that you want them to cut their grass. That's how petty it used to get sometimes. So for landlords out there, if that's the type of landlord that you are, I could happily invite you to leave the private rented sector now. You give us a bad reputation, by the way. Not you, Richard, the landlord.
No, I know you're not. I'm actually I'm going to run through a few things that actually what we're talking about, obviously what makes a good tenant. And a good tenant ultimately is somebody who cares for the property. They spot and raise potential issues early. That's a really important one. They understand that if they report things, they get dealt with, and it's to their benefit and to the property as well. Things that are left could be really detrimental and costly. They do little jobs without getting prompted. You know, that doesn't mean undertaking big renovations. That's maybe like changing cooker hood filters, or, you know, cleaning the extractor fan in the bathroom, looking after the garden, maintaining the garden. Obviously, that's something that's quite important, and a lot of people
changing the light bulbs.
Yeah, light bulbs.
You'd be surprised, Richard. In the past, I've had people phone me and go, "The light's not working. The light's not working." And it literally was, the light bulb had gone, and I went, "Do you realize that's normal tenant duties?"
Yeah,
it's like, it's the landlord's responsibility to replace the light bulb. It's yours.
We make sure at the start of every tenancy that all the light bulbs are in and working. So if you're provided I feel if you're provided with a light fitting or whatever, it's got a bulb in it, it works. If that runs out, you need to replace it.
It's the same with the toilet. It's like the toilet's blocked. Okay.
But what did you put down it then?
What have you been putting down the toilet? It transpires that it's sanitary towels, it's white wipes, and it's all the rest of it. And it's like, and it's nappies sometimes.
Or He-Man stuck in it.
He-Man, the toys are stuck in the tube in the toilet, and it's like, that's
maybe not He-Man nowadays, but yeah.
And then the expectation is, it's like, no, the landlord should be paying that cost. No, they shouldn't. It's like, you were given your toilet when it was unblocked. Who do you think blocked the toilet by their use? It was you. So it's your responsibility to unblock the toilet that you blocked, not ours as a landlord.
Yeah, toilets and light bulbs and all those things are really things that really are the tenant's responsibility, but there can be a wee bit of confusion. But also paying the rent on time, you would think that's a given, but not for everyone, maybe sometimes. But that is one of the important ones, is paying your rent on time.
Some people's definition of on time is a different definition of actually on time.
I know. When I say about reporting problems, when you report issues and things, doing it politely and having a conversation about it. You could have going in it irate about something that's just not going to resolve anything.
See what happens here, Richard. This is a great one. Amy, for example. Amy sends me an email and says, Jim, I'm sorry to bother you, but so-and-so's no
I love
working.
Amy.
I forward it onto the property management to you guys, and immediately it's fixed like that.
Yeah.
Whereas other people, come on and it's like, why am I not getting this done? It's like, when did you report it? Well, I'm just telling you the now. So why are you all guns blazing on the phone right now if this is the first time you're telling us and you've left it for 3 months like that and you've no told us within the 3 month period?
Or a Friday night or a Saturday night phone call, and it's like, okay, when did this happen? Oh, this was on Wednesday. What did you
on Wednesday? So I'm phoning you at the weekend, so it'll cost you a call out charge. It's like, that's no happening if it's no an emergency. And if it is an emergency, we're going to be charging you as well for that.
Yeah. But I mean, tenants like Amy, we have quite a lot of them, fortunately, and we have good relationships with them, and that's how things get resolved and how tenancies run very smoothly. Also, act responsible with residents and neighbours. Don't be antisocial, and don't leave you dealing with complaints about maybe noise or inconsiderate or inconvenient behaviour, which is obviously antisocial.
Well, look what's just happened right now. I've got one of the ones that we just took over. Apparently, the upstairs or the next door neighbour, the one of ours, basically assaulted the 80-year-old man next door, and it's like, you're out, pal. Strike. You're out. That's an eviction right now. We've got the criminal or the crime reference number from the thing. It's going on it, and that's the end of your tenancy. Now, I've only just taken this over 2 weeks ago, so that's it. One strike and you're out if it's like that. No tolerating that at all.
Yeah, the guy was in the office and we're dealing with his daughter now, so it's a very unfortunate situation for him to be in. But we will do all in our power, obviously, rectify that.
And I bet you what's going to happen out of that is the government will keep that person in their tenancy. Even though we've got a criminal, they've got a crime reference number against assault against that person next door. And I bet you the government legislation keeps them in their tenancy and stops us evicting them. This will be interesting to see, because I tell you what, I'll be on social media and I'll be tagging all the politicians in if this person gets to stay in that tenancy and the First State Tribunal stops that eviction.
Yeah, we've got the council officers as well, but we've got them on side, so it'll be interesting to see if it doesn't go through. I mean, why would be the answer?
Yeah, we'll be interesting to see, and we'll keep everybody updated about that. Actually, that'll be a good one. To actually use as a case study about how effective is this system that the politicians go on about all the time, and the fact that we're going to get these private landlords, we're going to sort them out, and the very legislation we're using to sort out the antisocial tenants that are assaulting neighbours and have a crime reference number and it's been reported, you're keeping in as a result of that legislation. That's the government for you.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one, Jim, and we'll keep an eye on that obviously and see how it goes. Also, when we talk about what makes a good tenant, and I think acknowledging the value of a tenant, people want to keep. If you want to keep someone, and many landlords opt to set the new rent just maybe below full market rates, which is more than covered by avoiding the time and cost of finding a new replacement tenant. Like we said, there's a lot of cost involved for a tenant changeover and sourcing and putting one in place. So always bear that in mind.
Yeah, we talk about this all the time. This is about commercial reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I used to talk about it to a lot of landlords when I was because I was the advice line and the helpline for the National Landlords Association in Scotland. So most people were referred to me in Scotland for any disputes they had in order for me to give them the right advice. And my point was exactly what I said about, I'm wanting you to do the garden on a Saturday and you're doing it on a Sunday. And that's not acceptable because I live next door and it's upsetting me because I sleep in on a Sunday. So that's the sort of thing. So now I'm going to evict you. And I'm like, okay, let's look at this. The tenant's paying the rent on time. They're paying the right good market rent. They've got a good job. They're not antisocial. Every other day of the week, they're fine. They don't have parties or anything like that. They're a really good neighbour to have. And they look after the property and they actually improve the property. Sorry, and you're going to put them out.
Yeah.
You're going to put them out because of one thing. They wouldn't cut their grass on a Saturday instead of a Sunday. I mean, it has been as petty as that. And
That's
it's like,
really
so what's
trivial
going to,
thing.
let's look at it. When you decide to actually evict them, you've got the cost of eviction. You've then got the time and the stress involved in eviction if you try to do it yourself, or you're paying £1,000 at least to a solicitor to do it for you. Then you've got the refurb, because the property might be fine for them to live in, but the pink wallpaper and the yellow carpets or something like that they have, it suits their purpose, and they were going to be a long-term tenant as a result, but you're going to have to change them now for the next tenant. So you're going to have to spend a few £1,000s in doing that. Then you're going to have a void, so you're going to lose £500 a month for the next couple of 2 or 3 months, and then you're going to lose it because you've got to get somebody to find out to fill it. So you're going to be at 4 months out of rent. So you're going to be 2,000 down. You're going to be 3,000 down to refurb it, and then you're going to have to move a new tenant in, which you don't know is any good in comparison to the brilliant tenant you've got right now. Do you think you should be evicting them for this?
No.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the commercial reality that people don't understand. And it's the same commercial reality it's going on right now with the legislation being so draconian and everybody getting upset. Now let emotion get in the road and behavioural finance goes out the window.
Yeah, definitely. Well, with that said, Jim, let's move on to where does the law stand on rent increases? And that is obviously the topic of on everyone's mind just now. And who is a landlord or investor. And depending on the location of your rental property in the UK and the status of your tenancy, you generally have 3 options for increasing rent. Mutually agreed, a rent review clause, or you serve notice. I mean, obviously this changes between Scotland and England, and there are also correct legal procedures to follow. And let's go through some of the most important points, I think. So if the tenancy is within a fixed term, which would be the only way that would be in Scotland now is if you're on a short assured tenancy, you'll have to wait until that ends before you can increase the rent, and unless an interim rent review clause was written into the agreement. Now that's more an English situation you would be in that kind of situation. Rent increases.
You do have it on the old short assured tenancies, don't you?
That's what I'm saying.
In
Scotland,
way
it would
back,
have to be short assured, yeah.
But we're on PRTs now, which is
on
the private
PRT.
residential tenancy agreement or something.
Private residential tenancy. So unless it's a short assured in Scotland, that's more relevant to England. Rent increases are normally limited to once a year, with the annual cap now this of 12% in Scotland, and slightly vague, fair and reasonable requirements in England and Wales. So Wales, not Wales. So as of the 1st of April, now the new legislation for rent increases says about the 12% there now.
2024, just in case anybody doesn't realise it's 2024 we're talking about.
1st of April.
Somebody watches this next year, they'll be going, whoa, rent's still at that level.
Yeah, so as of the 1st of April 2024, new legislation, now the rent freeze and things has all been lifted. Rent increases can be implemented. Now, if you have a rent increase put in place and you're a tenant and you feel that that is not at the right market level or it's too high, you could then apply to the Rent Service Scotland to review that, and they will look at it on an individual basis. Like you say, Jim, we'll get everybody to do that and see how they cope.
But the requirements are, if you don't apply, then the landlord could really just put the rent up to any level they want.
They could, yes, they can.
Yeah. So this 12% annual cap isn't applicable unless somebody applies to the rent registration service, like the tenant, or even the landlord. The landlord could even apply. I wonder if the landlord could apply to the rent registration service, because we could get every landlord to do it.
Yeah, and I think
that would cause the rent registration service a problem.
Yeah, but that's where it comes into be. It's really important to, obviously you're required to notify the tenant, and I'm going to cover that in a second, but it's really good to have that conversation with your tenant and actually agree on it between the two of you. And if both parties agree, then you should be fine. But before a new rent can take effect, you must give your tenant written notice, at least 1 month in England and Wales, and it's 3 months in Scotland. Now, obviously, you need to do that in an official capacity, but as I say, if you've got a good relationship or you want to continue a good relationship with your tenant and you're thinking about rent increases, have that conversation with them, or have your agent do it. Your agent will do that if you've got them in place.
So what we're doing right now, just to, what I'm doing, as I've
Yeah.
spoken to obviously Laura about this, is everybody that's on local housing allowance, and we know the local housing allowance is at that rate. We know what the new rate is going to be for local housing allowance. We've made it quite clear to them that we're putting the rent up to the local housing allowance rate. And we made it quite clear to them that we don't expect them to pay any more towards that if it falls short. It's only the fact that we're future-proofing the rent rises so they're in line with local housing allowance rates. The
And
reason
that
for that is because the local housing allowance rates on a review do not kick in straight away. There's some formula mechanism, which I think it's every 12 months from the date of the tenancy under the local housing allowance. So if the tenant moved in at May last year and you put your rent up in April, you'll not get that review through until May the following month. So you'll lose that increase in the April itself. So we're making tenants not to worry. Don't worry about this at all. We're just realigning it with the local housing allowance rate, and we don't expect you to pay any more because we realise that your rent's paid by the rent registration service. Now, for anybody out there tuning in thinking that's ridiculous, you're taking advantage of that. We're not really, because that is the local housing allowance is calculated on the 30% least expensive properties in the whole of the rental market. In other words, so we're charging a rent level which is still 30%, the lowest 30% proportion of all the properties. So in other words, if we're charging that rate, every other property, there's 66% more properties above that rate. So we could charge more, but we're just putting it to that rate to realign it to the true rent it should be in terms of local housing allowance to make sure. And it just allows us to continue to reinvest in the property. That's all we're doing. I'm not wanting to go out and buy a Ferrari or anything. You know, it's like it's no anything like that. It's just I want to make sure we've got enough margin in order to weather any storm to make sure the tenant has got what we call a secure tenancy. I like that. You know, we were always deemed to be an unsecured tenancy by the government because we were short assured tenancies. In other words, we could give you any notice any time without any grounds and just no fault eviction. Well, just evict you and take the property back when we wanted to. Just because we wanted to. So that was taken away. So to give people security of tenure, but to give people more security of tenure, we need to make sure we're charging the right rent levels in order to keep reinvesting and continue reinvesting in the property. And that's what it is. I mean, the roof needs changed, you know, every now and again. You know, I mean, I know it's once in 20 or 30 years or something like that, but some roofs, like some of the ones I've got, are horrendous. You know, they take a huge amount of money.
Thousands sorting them out.
Huge amount of money. And you could start again, but then when you start again, you're talking about 20, 30,000 to do the roof. So where's that going to come from? It's not going to come for 500 quid a month rent, is it?
No.
So there has to be a long-term investment there and a long-term replacement cost in there all the time. So as a landlord, you should be making sure you're building up a fund, not for you personally, but to make sure you can look after the stock that you've got, or even just the one property you've got.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're a landlord, and even if you've maybe just got one or two, and you've got that cash flow, that income coming in, if you're just spending that and not rest assured, there will be one day when you'll have a boiler or a roof or something will land in front of you, and where you've got the money to do that, and it should really have come from the money that you set aside for your.
I've had somebody recently that said they had to cancel their holiday.
Yeah.
I've had to cancel my holiday. I can't go on my holiday. Oh, poor you.
You should have kept money aside for it.
I think everybody thinks I should have sympathy for the private landlord in that case. It's like, poor you. It's like you've had to cancel your holiday to put a new boiler in for your tenant. Did you actually make sure you actually kept some of that money that you were making behind for planned improvements over time? Oh no, I just treated it as a regular income because I wanted an income to come in all the time for that reason. Well, okay. But in any business, you're going to have to put money aside. That's called a profit, by the way. Reserves. That's what a profit is. It's a reserve. In order, and a reserve is to actually look at. That's why we have water reserves or reservoirs. Reserves, water reserves. So we've got water when we need it. So you've got repairs when you need it. That's what a profit is. It is a revenue reserve for that reason. So if you've not done that as a private landlord, good luck to you. Again, I'm really on private landlords cases today. It's like, I'll invite you to leave the market as a private landlord. So we don't need you. You're giving us a bad reputation.
Yeah. But yeah, and just to come back to obviously the law around rent increases and things, it is important to remember that your tenant can legally challenge any rent reviews, and if they feel the increase is unfair or out of line with the local market. So make sure you have plenty of evidence to back up and have a watertight proposal for if they do challenge what you have set your new rent level at. And then that comes back to what I was saying about having that conversation and with your tenant and how to really approach your tenant about a rent increase. And that's what we're going to talk about now. And although rent reviews can be quite tricky, it's perfectly possible to keep hold of an excellent tenant at an increased rent if you plan things well with an approach that looks a little bit like maybe tell your tenant how much you appreciate them and that you'll continue maintaining your property to a high standard as you already should be in the years to come, and can you give them a reassurance of their comfort and that they're going to be able to stay in the property and have that continued enjoyment. Do you know, make it explain to them and demonstrate to them that it's for their benefit as well.
Yeah, I think that's it. And don't go too far, just in case you've got a tenant that just takes advantage of it. No, and occasion you're talking about the tenants that are normal run of the mill that look after you, but don't do this with a tenant. It's obviously a difficult tenant, because then you'll just look weak and they'll take advantage of that situation, and then they'll turn it on you. It's the wheel that squeaks the loudest gets the most oil. That's the most important thing. But it's also putting your case forward and saying, this is the case, this is what I need to do, this is why I need to increase the rent. Over time. Or you maybe just don't put that case at all and say, look, costs have gone up. Most people know straight away, cost of living crisis, we're in the same boat as you. We have to make sure we cover all the contractors' costs, all the insurance costs, all the bank costs, and all the rest of it. And that's it. Now, for anybody out there that sits and says to me, well, if I'm paying your mortgage, that means I should have an interest in your property. I have never expected to go into McDonald's and buy a burger at McDonald's and then expect to be the CEO and an owner of McDonald's.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't expect that for a tenant either, to be an owner, some sort of relationship or part owner, because it's been muted and given as an example from the government. Maybe the tenant should have an interest in the property as well because they're paying the mortgage. Well, I've never known any business for me to buy any product off of someone and expect to own the company. Because I bought the product.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Jim. And stick to the logic and the reality of the current market and the evidence of higher rents at similar properties that compare in good terms and location to your property in terms of size and style and specification. Do you know, don't compare. I mean, it's like we were talking about this the other day, Jim. It's like compare apples with apples. You know, don't be looking at something else and think, oh, I could get that rent because it's got the same amount of bedrooms as mine. They're in totally two different leagues.
It's a real good one. It's like it's an easy one to do because a lot of properties are actually rented in some streets. Therefore, it's easy for you to go upon some sort of historical information on Google, maybe where it's been listed before at a certain rent level, and you're not anywhere near that level, and it's comparatively the same house with the same sort of interior and the same it's on offer, and maybe that's sitting and it's been rented at £650 and you're sitting at £550 and you're saying to the tenant, well, I really need to come up to about 600 in order to, I don't want to put it too much, but the extra 50 quid a month will allow me to make sure I can continue to cover the necessary costs, because all my costs have gone up as well. Now, any tenant that knows what they're doing and are a bit savvy will go, yeah, that's okay with me, because I'm getting away with paying 600 quid a year extra, because it could be 650, or I'm no moving because obviously the disruption it causes, so I'm quite happy to pay the extra 50 quid a month. Because of what you're doing, how you're looking after me, and anything I need to do. I had one person that said, I've got no desire to go and buy another property ever again, because I used to have to repair everything myself, and in this situation, all I do is pick the phone up to Jim, and it's fixed like that, and he pays for it.
Yeah,
I remember that. That was Duddingston Drive in Kirkcaldy. And she had actually sold her house and moved into her property and says, I've got no desire to go and run out and buy a property right now. I just pick up the phone and Jim fixes it and pays for it every single time.
And if
does it quicker than I would do it.
Yeah, you've got a good landlord and an agent in place for that landlord. It's just seamless for them, and they don't see the need to have the expense of owning when they could be in a property and have things fixed like that.
So when you talk about a smaller rent increase, you know, and it's no up to the market rent, then most tenants will fall in line and say, yeah, that's fine. It's okay. But again, as I said, they're all primed it's coming anyway, because even the government's doing us a favour, because they're sending out stuff to tenants and emails saying that there's a rent increase coming and this is what you should be doing. So they're priming every single tenant in Scotland, telling them that there's a rent increase coming. So as a landlord, if you're not going to take this opportunity to put your rents up, then you're a fool. I'll honestly say that again. If you're not taking this opportunity as a landlord right now to put your rents up on the 1st of April, you're a fool. Because the government has actually primed every single tenant in Scotland that the rent's going up from every private landlord. Just do it.
Yeah.
You'll not regret it, because some years you'll not be able to put the rent up because you might be competing against other people. And when it's leaner times, you will have some sort of reserves in order to weather that storm, because it will come, and it has been. You're talking to somebody that's been in this for 30 years as an investor and seen all the ups and downs, the swings and roundabouts, the glory times and the not so glory times. You know, I've been through it all, and you have to weather a storm, and you have to have good reserves as a result of that. So this is my advice to you: is you put your rents up on the 1st of April, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, definitely recommend that's what to do. You mentioned, Jim, about obviously, well, we're talking about the conversations to how to approach tenants and things, and you talked about obviously increased expenses and things, and everybody's experiencing that. If you're having that conversation with your tenant, steer clear of the actual specifics of your expenses and things. I wouldn't divulge too much information to your tenant in terms of the actual specifics of your costs. So just be wary of that. Obviously, you don't want.
It's because then it becomes personal when you start doing that, and then it becomes a standoff, more or less. In other words, I could just give you a real great analogy. It's like two cowboys standing with their guns ready to draw. You know, that's it in the street. And that's almost, oh, I'm doing it this way, and I'm having to do it with this, and the tenant's going, but I'm having to do it with this. Now, there's a third alternative to this relationship. It's like that's the tenant's point of view, that's your point of view, but there's a third alternative to do this if you're a skilled negotiator, in order to get the third alternative, which is the win-win situation every single time. That's why you have a really good skilled negotiator in your property management division, in order to do that for you, to find that third alternative between both parties. This is the old scenario about we could all look at, let me grab a picture.
Yeah, I think you're
we could all look, there's Glastonbury. I got this off somebody, but I'll give you an example. Here's Glastonbury, okay?
all right,
Now, everybody can look at that picture, but they'll think something different about that picture. Some people will see stress and anxiety because they don't like being in crowds. Some people like me will say, oh my God, Glastonbury, take me back now. And some people will see different things. But it's all the same picture, isn't it? And yet we all see it differently. And we all interpret it differently. So if that's the result, that's why when you've got the same situation with a tenant, you see it your way, the tenant sees it a completely different way, but you're both looking at it the same thing. How is that possible? If you're both looking at the same thing, you can see it in different ways. That's why a skilled, strong negotiator in a property management company can work on your behalf to get that increase in rent over without any disruption, with minimal disruption, with less stress, and you're no longer taking all this flack for it, and you're not having to deal with it, because guess what? 99 times out of 100, you are not a skilled negotiator as a private landlord doing it yourself. You just, because you've only got one property, and you're probably just you're maybe just working in the NHS. You're maybe just working at a normal job at a desk. You're maybe just doing day-to-day stuff. It doesn't require any of these skills at all. You maybe just inherited accidentally the property, and you thought, I'm going to rent it to see how I get on, and you maybe had never had to negotiate anything in your life in that situation. And that's why it becomes so difficult for a lot of people to actually be able to manage the tenancy effectively, and be able to approach their tenant and understand their tenants' needs and deliver the service that they want as the result of that. And you'll get rewarded handsomely for it, for that reason. Well, I wouldn't say handsomely, but when you multiply it up, it does over the years. If you look
not
after
even
the
in monetary terms, Jim. Obviously, emotionally things as well. If things are done properly like that, you'll reap the rewards of not having all the stress and everything that goes with that if it's done incorrectly. And
and for anybody out there, the rent is essential to run the business.
Yeah.
If you've got no rent, you can't pay the bank, you can't pay the insurance, you can't pay any improvements you have to do or repairs on the property either. You can't pay your letting agent. You know, your letting agent's not even getting paid when the rent's not getting paid.
Yeah.
And a lot, I've seen it before where it's a lot of people, well, what am my letting agent doing about it? But the letting agent's in the same boat. The letting agent's in the same boat as you. They're not getting paid either, and you're getting them to do all this stuff for you effectively for free and deal with this tenant. So having a managing agent's kind of like an insurance policy. When it goes brilliantly well, the managing agent, happy days. But when it doesn't go as brilliantly well, thank God you've actually got a managing agent, because then it's still happy days. And
they're dealing with it for you.
Times and the bad times, make sort of, it's okay to be in this business sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely really good advice. And really, it's just to give you the peace of mind, and to remember that most tenants will actually accept rent reviews just as part of life and in the cycle of being a tenant. There's nothing to be ashamed of about rent increases. And as you say, Jim, there's always room to negotiate if you are, whether your agent's doing that on your behalf or not, with the tenant if they are not happy with what the proposal is. So then people might be asking, well, are you getting the correct rental income? So find that perfect balance between keeping your property occupied, popular and profitable as really what you want. And that's what we do as letting, and what I do as letting and managing property. So anybody that would want any information on how to do that correctly with the rental home, then please feel free to reach out to me. I've put my mobile number in my email and the blog attached to this post, so anybody could reach out to me. And of course, on the comments here, if it's on the rerun and you comment, we will get that as well.
Yeah, it's the same with TikTok. There's a few people on TikTok now, and if you're on TikTok, you can't obviously see anything else other than just the live broadcast. If you need to talk to us about anything, you can message us on TikTok. You can do that. Just message us with details, what you want to talk about. I've got a question here from Adam, actually. He says, a bit stuck, flat and a semi-detached, both 150 grand, same postcode, don't know which to go for, both 2-bed. Semi-detached every day. It's like that's kind of a no-brainer in my mind. Semi-detached will more than likely have a separate garden for itself. And semi-detached will be easier to exit as well with a semi-detached than a flat if they're both really in the same postcode. But I don't know exactly what the properties are, but I would imagine semi-detached is more appealing than a flat. For a tenant, so your occupancy rate will more than likely be a lot higher as a natural result of that.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, if so, what did you say the guy's name was?
Adam.
If Adam wanted, then but obviously let us know the postcode if it's local to us. I could give a wee bit more insider knowledge. But yeah, definitely. And that's us, I think, for this morning, Jim.
Perfect. Okay, thanks for your time, Richard. Really enjoyed that.
It's quite good.
I could be a bit, intense sometimes with this.
we know.
I think it's important that landlords realise that, as a landlord, you have a duty and responsibility towards your tenant. You're actually looking after them. They're living in your property. You have a duty of care, even morally. Under the legislation, you have Standard Repair and Improvement Act and all the rest of it. But you also have, over 370 pieces of legislation to contend with, or something like that. There's something crazy, maybe 170, but it's still a lot. There's a lot of legislation to contend with. But that's the important thing you must remember is you have a duty of care towards your tenant. Look after your tenant. After all, it is your customer. You're probably working right now in an industry where you're a customer of someone else. Could you imagine if you treated your tenant, if you were treated like you treated your tenant? Now, in my instance, hallelujah, I'll be well looked after. But in some other people's instance, well, maybe no so hallelujah. You wouldn't want that service that you treat your tenant with. So why would you do that if you wouldn't want it yourself? So treat people like you'd want to be treated yourself. You know, look after them like that as well. If you wouldn't want to live in that property as it stands now, why would you expect anybody else to live in it like that? That's how I look at it. If I
Yeah.
wouldn't live in it, why would I expect anybody else to live in it? I always rent property when it goes to market. Like, yeah, I could live in that. Okay, I know everybody else would want to live in that. Then is
Yeah,
okay.
definitely.
So
They're
hopefully
really,
that's
really
helped
important.
everybody.
Yeah, I think that's been really informative today. Thanks for all your input, Jim. I hopefully everybody's found something that they could take away for that. And like I say, you could reach out to us if so. We'll be back on Monday, Jim, the Wealth Creation Show. We are talking
Ooh,
about comparative analysis.
yeah, it's all written here.
Yeah,
It's quite interesting. Comparative analysis, specifically the context of wealth creation, focuses on individuals as assess and compare different financial strategies, investments, and performance metrics.
yeah.
That's I'm looking forward to that. Compare investment vehicles, analysis, return on investment, ROI. Woohoo! Floating my boat here.
Risk analysis.
Comparing
Yeah.
risk profile, sensitivity analysis, cost benefit analysis. Oh my god, this is a dream for me,
And,
Richard. Cost
yeah, oh,
benefit
that's
analysis.
right up your street, Jim. So yeah,
Comparing savings and retirement plans. You know, you saw some of my shots of my, what you need. Oh my
yeah, you
god,
told me that the other
the,
day. I
the, the
know.
screenshots I sent you of what you need to retire and what you would get at a certain level, and it's like everybody's up shit creek
We could maybe
at this
share some of
point
them.
in
We could
time.
share them on Monday, actually.
Oh my god, it's like when you realize what you need to just have some sort of comfortable life
Even
and
just
what
a
the
normal,
average
yeah.
pension pot everybody's got now, most people are going to be screwed.
Even
And
just
I
a
don't know where the
basic
money's going to
minimum.
come from, but we're going to go through a transition. A lot of people, and a lot of my age, we're going to go through a transition where we're going to have to learn a lesson the hard way, and the younger generation is probably going to be protected from it because the lesson that we are going to learn is what they're going to benefit from
Yeah.
if they have the wisdom to understand that, rather than go, "What do you know, old person?" It's like it's like, well, I know a damn sight more than you, because probably experience is more important than wisdom. And quantitative and qualitative analysis is right. That's right on my street.
Yeah.
Cash flow return, decision making, implementing strategies. Yeah, looking
Yeah.
forward to that show on
Well,
Monday
lots
at
to cover on
12:30.
Monday. It'll be a good show.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much.
Right, that's great. And I'll leave it there. Have a good weekend, everyone, and we'll see you Monday on the Wealth Creation Show.